glad to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Now we'll move to the question and answer session. Every now and then, my dear friend from New Jersey and I both agree on something. There are a lot of times I just simply want to look at him and go, "Bless your heart." But we have found a something that's common here, and I was going to jump on it. I'm going to ask my friend to, when it's his turn for questioning, to address it, and that was, Mr. Camp, your description of the difference between when a claimant is 100% disabled by the VA and they're not by the Social Security Administration. We're going to dive into that a little bit later. But a couple of things that stood out to me in the testimony, Ms. Davis, just an observation. You went through a list of things that that you were looking to do to improve, and you said, and finally, IT, or finally technology. I certainly don't mean to sound like I'm preaching to you, but I would start with IT and not make it the final thing that you've got to go to. We've heard time and time again from the administration that it is all about personnel and increased money for that personnel. Certainly understand that it does take people, but I think there has to be a renewed interest, not a renewed interest. There has to be laser focus on the implementation of proper technology. I just think that you cannot, no business in America, no government agency can solve the problems that they have with processing if they don't use proper technology.
Ditto.
We found it again, twice in one hearing. Oh, I don't know what that means. Yeah, exactly. It does have me worried. But I'll just make that observation on there. As I get into my questions here, Ms. Russell, you made a comment. You said that if you have consistent hiring authority, you said that would help with retention. I'm confused because you got to hire somebody to fill an open slot. How does that action help with retention? You see, I mean, it just looks like you're saying, all right, we just need to hire more folks so it helps with retention. Why are they leaving to begin with? Hiring somebody doesn't seem to address the problem why they're leaving.
Thank you, Chairman Ferguson, for that question. It's a great question. The way that helps disability determination agencies is if we have consistent hiring authority to replace our losses, then we have consistent staff there to process those claims. When staff leave, their caseloads have to be reallocated to other staff. So that means we have staff with increased workloads, which leads to burnout, and then that leads to attrition because people can only work the amount of hours that they have in a day. And when they have a higher workload, then that leads to pressure for them, which leads for them to leave. And the disability determination agency staff, they care so deeply about this work. I'm struck by that when I first arrived at the DDS. They care so deeply, and they take this home with them, and they wear this. And so when they're not able to turn a decision around in a reasonable time frame, they have a lot of guilt associated with that. And that they're
all right. Thanks for the clarification on that. One of the things that I look at, we've seen is that, Mr. Camp, I'm going to address this to you. If we're having trouble meeting the current caseload, and then you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to go scoop up more people to bring them into a program that is naturally declining in its initial applicants. Does that seem like a good resource, a good use of resources?
There are certainly improvements in what we already are using that need to be taken today. There are changes that need to be made now with already paid for new programs as to the dot replacement and processes that are obviously just available with a policy change. If you have 90% of findings at reconsideration not involving any additional effort or work or findings, word for word the same as they were 300 days earlier in the process, that should represent an opportunity for some savings, for some 9 out of 10, perhaps, savings at that stage. It's not hard to find activity at initial and reconsideration that isn't necessary and that is slowing things down. There are opportunities for the use of the current staffing and the current budgetary authority that also involve those of us on the outside of the program that speak for the claimants, that speak to the claimants, and that advocate on their behalf. We will get it done. If you give us the information online, let us see what's happening on a case, we will get it done. We will answer the claimant's questions. We will go get that evidence. We will speed up their process if they let us do it. And we'll do it without an appropriation.
Okay. When we talk about updating the job roles, Ms. Warshawski, I think you touched on, you talked about this in your testimony. In your opinion, is there a good explanation why this has not been done?
Chairman, I don't have an explanation. The agency has been aware of this problem with the out-of-date DOT for already 20 years. They tried various other data sources, and they decided already almost 15 years ago to go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics to sponsor a survey. It took some time to sort of get that organized, but the data is in. It was validated, and it's been published. So it is a mystery to me why it has not been used.
Well, let's go back down to the other end here. Ms. Davis, since you're in the middle of it,
Sure.
help us solve this mystery.
All right. Well, thank you for the question.
Because 20 years is, we heard from a group last week talking about when we were looking at, dealing with trying to speed up claims on the beneficiary side. We've got programs that were authorized 8 years ago that still haven't been implemented. So same thing. Yeah, you got great technology. Explain to us why y'all can't get this done.
Okay, thank you, first of all, for the question. So while I've not been directly involved in any of these policy discussions, I understand that this is a complex, multi-year plan that we need to move through.
20 years ain't long enough.
Well, that is long enough, yes. We have been making progress, and we have met our goals for reviewing and updating the medical criteria and also the occupational data. And
Ms. Davis, again, I promise I'm not trying to be combative.
Yeah,
I'm just trying
sure.
to understand. So you've met your goals, okay? Yet we're 20 years from implementation. You've met your reviews. Why is there are those goals published? Can you provide us a copy of those stated goals and how many steps it will take to get this implemented so that some poor individual is not sitting in front of Congress in 5 more years going, why is it 25 years instead of 20 years?
Yeah.
Can you provide us those goals and we can see the steps of how y'all are trying to implement something that seems like it could be done very quickly?
sure, we're happy to submit that for the record.
Thank you.
Any changes to our policies have to be well supported by the evidence and designed to achieve decisional accuracy. So while 20 years is a long time, there have been things going on behind the scenes. But let me provide a written response for the record so that you can understand the steps that we've gone through.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, because 20 years is an awfully long time,
I agree.
particularly when you have someone like Mr. Camp described that simply could not outlast Social Security to receive a benefit. Very sad story. Mr. Camp, quick question, and then I'll move on. I'll let others have this. And this is some data that we have on disability decisions. At the initial level, 38% are allowed, 62% are not allowed. And Ms. Burdick, I think you touched on this as well, so I'm gonna let y'all address this. When you go into the reconsiderations, 15% were allowed, 85% were disallowed. Okay, so you've got a huge chunk over here that are not being allowed. Then when it gets to the administrative law judge hearing, it's almost like this thing flips and goes the other direction, where you have 51% that are allowed at that process, 39% denied. So we've gone from 85 to 39 at this point. Who's right and who's wrong? Is the judge right or is Social Security right? Mr. Camp, I'll start with you.
If you compare the attention paid to the claim at the early stages to the attention paid to the claim by a judge, with a lawyer in the room, with witnesses called, with all of the evidence updated, it is 15 minutes to hours. Hours is better. 15 minutes is not enough time to read thousands of pages of medical records and get anything right. And some of the time at reconsideration, it's not the 15 minutes. If the consultant physician comes in and there is no new evidence, which is often the case, they are given an agree button to click. 300, 500 days later, come in, you don't even need to spend the full 15 minutes, just click a button and walk back out. That is not an adjudication process at all. That's just days waiting, and it's not service to the claimants. At the ALJ stage, that does not occur. There are hearings. The judge looks at the file for hours, has clerks assisting. The attorneys can do their work. We see all of the exhibits. We see the statuses change. We see the expert that's been called to testify. We prepare. We can help the agency get it right at the ALJ stage. And we are blocked at initial and reconsideration.
Yeah, Ms. Burdick, could you address this what it appears to be sort of major problem at the beginning of the process? Could you offer suggestions on how to improve that for the folks that you represent?
Absolutely. Well, at the initial claim, the claim goes, it's a paper claim that goes to the DDS to adjudicate. And the initial, and as you said, 38% of people are.
And now you can't even use faxes, right?
You can't use faxes, though you can sometimes be on electronically. So if people come to us early, we are helping to get the evidence, submitting it to the initial adjudicator who is looking at it. But there is only so much you can do on a claim when you are just looking at paper. So the difference between when the case is a DDS and when it moves on to administrative law judge is you have a human in the room and you have the claimant has an opportunity to go before that judge and explain how their combinations of impairments really meet the standard, right? A lot of people are don't have just one problem that makes them disabled. Frequently, you have a lot of things that come together, right? And so what's problematic about having this secondary level of review is if they can't see it on the paper at the initial claim, why is another person gonna be able to do that same thing? What you really need is that different format where there is a conversation. But to help people at the earlier level, having one of the things that we think is most important is rejiggering the current rules to make sure those initial adjudicators are getting more treating source evidence. It makes common sense that people's treating providers know the most about them. They have a history with you. They've talked to you most of the time. But frequently we find that even where people have those providers, the DDSs aren't doing a good enough job at getting that evidence. And it's not their fault. The rules aren't well calibrated. They send 2 letters, then they rely on these consultative exams that we've discussed, or that earlier people discussed where a one-time Social Security doctor might talk to someone for 10 minutes. It's just, really focused on getting treating source data and looking at that would improve things.
All right, thank you so much for that. Mr. Pasquarello, you are now recognized. Thank you. Let me say this, thank you all for those thoughtful answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.